That's a period. Generally, it was the war of national resistance. Various traditional communities were fighting, standing up against German colonialism. And as they were doing that, they were also seeing what was happening. Because remember, Germany initially did not want to be the one to establish the colonies. They wanted private companies with private capital to be able to do that. So in December 1905, the German Reichstag, which is the German word for German parliament, passed a resolution because they saw that the communities were resisting now. From 1904, were resisting against the German colonial occupation. They passed a resolution and said that police protection in German Southwest Africa should be limited to the smallest areas. So we don't want you to be all over the place. It must be limited to smallest areas, and those smallest areas must be those areas of strategic economic importance to the Germans. That's the resolution that they passed in December 1905. In March, 15th of March 1907, 2 years later, a decree came from Berlin to Windhoek with a map. And that map, because remember they have already indicated that, look, we don't want you to be all over Southwest Africa. We want you to be at specific places that are of strategic importance to us. We don't want you to see you all over the place. So on the 15th of March, 1907, the Germans actually sent a map from Berlin. They sent a specific map indicating the area that will enjoy government and police protection. And they marked that map. They actually sent 100 copies, just that you can't see, we're supposed to have a projector. You can see that thick line, just actually marked in blue. So, from 1907, the Germans have indicated the specific area, cartographically. Where is it that they think that these things should, okay. Now, this blue line that was drawn in Berlin was subsequently, it became known as the police zone. So in other words, the police zone boundary that came from Berlin and then to be implemented in here. Now, one of the patterns that you immediately begin to see is that this blue line, where the Germans were now restricted, just control this area, the government, the police should not go beyond this area. In drawing that, they followed the old cordon that we are talking about, that was established to apparently control Rinderpest. A week later, that's on the 22nd of March 1907, Lindequist, that we're talking about, the deputy to Theodor Ludwig, issued a decree. Now he's gotten an order now from the Germans, which he must implement. So they established 3 game reserves. Yeah? The first reserve, so on that side, Grootfontein and Kavango, game reserve. So in other words, the restricted areas. The second game reserve that they established is around the area of Etosha. And it goes all the way to the sea. In fact, it's actually on this map. This one, the whole area of Etosha, it goes all the way to Kaoko, to the sea. It became another restricted area, the game reserve. So you cannot access it. Whether the communities, for example, the Andongas used to go to Namtoni and all those places for hunting. After that time, it's a restricted area. In fact, I got the proclamation that was later by the South African government, where they went to actually criminalize and say, if you are found, what is it that could happen to you? So, and then they went further to define and say what constitute the police zone. So, by implication, you already had that boundary that created the police zone, and you had this game reserves that goes all the way. So you would now begin to see that the police zone not only have the demarcation of the territory, but it's also locked in through those game reserves that are also restricted areas in terms of the movement of it. So the idea is that to control and contain everybody in northern Namibia to be able to do that at that specific time. So what you immediately then begin to have is these game reserves were not just meant for economic reasons or to apparently preserve the wildlife and things like that, but it had a specific geopolitical design on the part of the Germans. So as you know that in 1915 the Germans would lose the war and Namibia would be taken over by South Africa. Okay, welcome Tateki, good to see you. So the South African took over now Namibia, or as it was known, the German Southwest Africa. Just that year, that the following year, rather, when the South Africans took over, there was another disease, animal disease, it's called lung sickness. And lung sickness was also having a negative impact in the territory. Now remember, the Southwest Africa is now part of South Africa. So the South Africans didn't play around when they just heard that there is lung sickness detected in Southwest Africa. They banned importation of all meat products that are coming from German Southwest Africa. And obviously the settlers, the German settlers who had remained, they depended heavily on farming and cattle export. So they need to have access to the South African market in order for them to be able to exercise something like that. So they started doing a lot of petitioning. They started petitioning the South African authorities and working together to say, no, we must do away with this banning and this restriction. And in the process of negotiating, they started negotiating a deal that will help themselves. To say, no, we have something better to offer. So, because of that pressure that was imposed on them, the South African colonial government sent the head of veterinary services, the guy is called Good All. The name is literally good and all in one word. So this Good All guy came now to see, and then the Germans were really advancing the case to be able to say, no, this thing cannot continue. We need to be able to find an alternative. So what they did cleverly, and interestingly before that, during the time of an embargo, when they couldn't export the cattle, the settlers, the Germans, were actually selling their cattle to northern Namibia. And some of them were literally taking their cattle to southern Angola to sell there because there was an embargo. The so-called unsafe place, the cattle were coming now south of what we now know as the Red Line, being sold in the so-called contaminated areas. Because remember, already that demarcation was already clear, that created northern native territories in the northern part, and the Southwest Africa proper, where they needed now to establish a proper settler colony, a settler economy, and settler society. So we could already see when there was a banning, there was trading. The settlers were trading their cattle into northern Namibia, including southern Angola, that people will hear them talking about a lot today. So they managed to convince the South African. Germans such as G. Schmidt, for instance, he worked for the German colonial, he was a veterinarian in the German colonial society. So these are the guys who were now advancing the argument to be able to say, no, please open up, and assuring them in opening up, what is it that is going to happen? So who did they trade? they traded again to reinforce, to say, no, we must now just reinforce this boundary. We must reinforce this boundary so that we can create a distinct existence between our sides and our animals and those barbarians. So they had to trade northerners in order for the embargo to be uplifted by the South African authorities. And this is eventually what went to happen as part of this deal of theirs. So you now had a situation where they had effectively, my notes are all over the place. You now had a situation where they had effectively ensured that they create a situation in which, just hold on. So they create a situation in which you are able to control. So what they did effectively, as part of that deal, they drew again lines on the map in 1916. They again drew lines on the map with a red line. The red line on the map indicating that this is, as part of the deal to uplift the embargo, this is where you must do the demarcation in order to keep those guys out. So it moved obviously from being just in the map, because it had to be physically enforced at certain intervals. Okay? So the South African just continued with the same strategies, with the same tactics, and we got independent. It was maintained for those specific reasons. I'm mentioning these things for you to be able to understand exactly why do you have certain things said and done in certain ways to achieve certain objectives. What is it that we have said with this history? What do we get in the interpretation of this history? One is that in erecting what eventually became as a red line, yeah, they were doing it to protect their animals, and they didn't care with the animals of the rest. So in other words, what do you have there? You have a colonial logic. That's one. Number two, they created a red line to prevent rinderpest, but it did not succeed. It failed. So the initial purpose was to prevent rinderpest, and it did not prevent rinderpest. But it was absolutely very clear already for their animals. They were not concerned about the animals of anybody else. They also did it deliberately to humiliate, and it failed in meeting its objectives. I was going to read to you, there's one article. It's actually interesting because it's a white guy who wrote it about the red line. And he made interesting conclusions. And he actually called it the red line as a barbarian border. And then he says that the red line is a core element for an understanding of Namibia's colonial history, and its legacy is still relevant in Namibia today. The history of this inner Namibia border reflects the long process through which the Namibian territory and its people were physically and metaphysically segregated. The red line defines the limits of South African settler society, representing an attempt to draw a line against what was perceived as the African interior. So the whites, when they went to create that, they're also indicating that this is where our territory that we've conquered ended. And they did not want to, and they were backed by some resolutions that were also taken by the German parliament. Now, if you fight for freedom and independence, you fight against colonial logic. do whatever research, it cannot exist in a democracy. The government is like a father of the house. The father has responsibility towards all children. You don't protect some in their properties and leave out others. So in a constitutional democracy, Kadira will probably ventilate and go in details. This thing cannot stand. But by adopting the constitution, we also say that people must not be discriminated. In Freiburg in 1896, they already decided that the Africans must be disinfected. But when you come from the north, they will ask you to get out of the car and step in the mat, on the mat, isn't it? Because your shoes might actually have infection. This is in 2021. But how many pairs of shoes do you have? In your car that you are wearing and you pass by Oshivelo or Murani or this side of Opuo, maybe you only worn them that day. Allow you foolishly to pass with all the other shoes in the bag, but you must get out and disinfect on that mat in 2021, just as was resolved in Freiburg in 1896. You don't have a responsibility to have a situation where you can eat this contaminated. First of all, you determine, they don't even test to see whether the meat is contaminated. But by geography, they already make a determination that it's contaminated without testing it. But they say to you that you must eat this meat here, on this side of the table. They can allow you, if you go to Oshivelo and you stand outside your car, yeah, you can consume that meat there with the presence of the police. But immediately when you pass, just a few centimeters on this side, it becomes illegal. That is the effect of maintaining and sustaining something like that. So you would have a lot of fundamental rights that are violated in terms of, they say that Namibia is a unitary state. Yeah? This I'm just talking about the constitutional democracy. If you are saying Namibia is a unitary state, how would you then explain a unitary state that is divided by boundaries that were decided in 1896? If you have to do a test, a constitutional test of what constitutes a unitary state in a country that is divided by those boundaries on baseless grounds. In fact, on the 25th of May 2011, the World Organization for Animal Health declared that rinderpest in the whole world is eradicated. In other words, the rinderpest no longer exists in the world. That's the primary purpose why the REDLINE was established, to contain the rinderpest, but they failed, admittedly. But it still continued to, so it defies logic. But it's also, there's a lot of cultural, socio-cultural inhibitions. You are getting married to a rural lady from Hobabis and you have 100 cattle in Opuo, you must pay lobola. Say they're asking for 5 cattle. You must actually go and buy what you already have. Yeah? How do you then, in a democratic society, in a free country, where you are forced to buy 5 cattle when you have 100 at home, in a unitary state, with a constitution that guarantees freedom of movement? When they say freedom of movement, am I moving naked? I'm moving with my cell phone, isn't it? I'm moving with my car. I'm moving with my meat. I'm moving with my kudring. And some of you move with your cigarettes and cognac. But I cannot move with my chicken. Why? It's because you must buy from ShopRite, isn't it? For them to sustain their economy. Fine, because if you are arguing and saying, no, animal disease and what, this, I'm not bringing meat to Windhoek or to Cape-Mansop to go and distribute to people. This is for my personal consumption. If you accept that it's for my personal consumption, if it's not healthy, you as a government must ensure that I don't eat that unhealthy meat in my house. So there is no basis, no argument that you could also have these people. We try even to listen to whatever it is that they are trying to do. What is it that they use as a defense? And you could see that most of these arguments are either made by people who, they will not give you a historical context, they will not give you a factual analysis. Even if you say they are, okay, this is the second point, we'll probably come to that. They are saying, no, our economy will collapse. Which economy will collapse? So sometimes, particularly you as young people, you always just say, no, the economy, if you remove the red line, the economy will collapse. It's like a person guy, can you imagine a guy that owes you, and you come to his room, you want your money, and then the guy just tells you inside, you know, if you open that door, you die. Are you going to go back? Just because you are told. They must actually demonstrate to us, how is this economy going to collapse? Agriculture as a whole, where this beef industry is, agriculture as a whole contributes only 6% to the country's GDP. Only 6%. That includes many things, ne? Agriculture as a whole. Animals is just part of it. It's crops and many other things there. But only 6%. So for you to find out how much does the beef industry, for instance, contribute to the country's GDP, you must actually go inside the 6%. You might discover that it's probably only 1 or 2%. So they don't tell you when they submit those arguments about the economic collapse. Is this fear-mongering? When you hear of the economy, you will be like Zimbabwe. Like, it's easier to tell, maybe go to villages and tell people these things. But those of you with the necessary consciousness and content carry a responsibility to explain to society. They will not come and debate. Because I remember I was called by a Namibian son, some Pistorius guy from this meat association, we challenged him to a debate. In fact, it's not me, I was just invited. When the guy just heard that I'm coming, the guy disappeared. He didn't want to come. Hank Madge is a good acquaintance. He came to the debate. First he was debating, and after, towards the end, he said he ended up conceding that this thing cannot continue. Because we're presenting superior logic, engaging them quantitatively and qualitatively. Not just these things of people talk. You can even find if somebody with grade 2 saying, no, our economy will collapse. And the person who's already, you yourself, you have already collapsed in your existence. You are talking about the economy that will apparently collapse. And then they talk about control of diseases. And the other time I gave an analogy about a father in a house with five kids. 2 are girls and 3 are boys. And the 2 girls are playing outside. The father and the wife and the boys are inside the house. Then the pit bull comes, chasing their girls, and the girls are running. And the father gets out of the house quickly, and he sees that there's a big pit bull chasing the girls. What does the father do? To say, I need to protect my wife and my 3 boys that are here. What does this father do? He locks the gate. The kids are running for cover. The father locks the gate. The pit bull kills the 2 girls. What type of father is that? Would your wife even believe that you are a proper husband? In this equation, the father is a government. Children who are in the house, some are in the northern, some are in the southern part. If there's really diseases that you need to fight, you have a responsibility of fighting the diseases even there. You can't protect some at the expense of others. If we are all equal as citizens, why is it that you must protect Ruiz cattle in Ludritz and leave mine? If there's a disease now, why must you protect? What special about those people who are southern part of the red line in a unitary state where there's equality of rights? What is special about them? So when you think about it and internalize them, you start wondering what type of argument can these people do. So first of all, it's not even the argument about disease. In the 1960s, there was foot and mouth disease in southern part of Namibia. What did they do? Did they go to create some boundaries? They don't tell you that, but there was actually foot and mouth disease in southern Namibia. There was a case like that. Nothing ever happens. And some people have this argument, put a fence in southern Angola before you remove. Huh? Now put in that analogy of the father. Does the father have a luxury of saying, no, first call the police before I go out, or bring the shoes or bring the mask before I go and save the kids? The government cannot even entertain those arguments to say other people must suffer. There is no legal basis, no social basis to say, and in fact, there's no political basis to say that others must suffer, must remain excluded while I do that. That logic is not even something, it does not make legal sense or otherwise, because there's no luxury of saying, there's a problem of rape in Windhoek. But before we remove those people that are raping, we must first put a line. So in other words, the rapists must continue raping while we are putting things in place. What type of logic is that? In other words, the injustice must continue while you prepare yourself. No. You have a responsibility towards all citizens of our country. And those arguments shouldn't actually, and it's been allowed, cheap arguments, it's been allowed because they are not challenged with superior logic. Because whenever you reason like that, always put yourself in those situations. Would you accept somebody saying rape must continue while I'm implementing the law? Or a person to say, yeah, I can actually see that you are suffering. You know these stories of, this argument that we always make about you are with your friend or you come to a scene, a person is stuck in the car, but there are some people who actually believe that you must wait for the ambulance. And you know that the ambulance is 100 kilometers away. Realistically, you will never get and this person is bleeding. Would you say, let me wait for an ambulance and the person will die in front of you and you are going to live with misery for the rest of your life? So it's the same logic that is used to this thing. And you also hear about the Europeans. What if the Europeans by their own volition decide not to buy meat from you? And whose meat is this that we are talking about that are being bought by these guys? And you hear people, no, the red line is being politicized. I'm very clear. I have animals on the other side. Even if you have to, because if you go to court, you must have local standard. I'm affected because my meat is confiscated. So all of you, say for example, if everybody in Namibia agrees with this nonsense of the red line, I'll still continue. Because as an individual, my rights I need to ventilate my rights. And Kadila will go in details in terms of what is it that we are asking there. I must be able to come with my meat to feed my children and my wife. So that's the nucleus level. Because we have right to culture. In my culture, as a man, if I cannot provide for my family, I'm a failure. So we cannot be in a situation where you know that if you have even just maybe take one goat, you cut it up, you put in a cooler box, you bring it here, you put in your fridge. It can sustain you and your family for about 2 or 3 months. But you must go and buy from ShopRite because ShopRite is theirs, Pick n Pay is theirs. And they've already messed up our minds and we even start, even amongst ourselves, no, the red line cannot go. No, the red line cannot go. The same person, if I come with those shoes that I was talking about that are in the bag, and I was maybe moving around, playing around with, maybe I have some powers to get closer to the buffalo, and then I give these shoes to you. You come back, you know when you are coming back from the southern part of the red line, you are not subjected to that. You don't touch that mat thing. It's a crazy thing. So what are we seeking to do? By removing this 1896 red line, we are completing and furthering liberation. They went to fight for freedom and say, we are going to be free, we are going to be what, and all those things. So we are completing the incomplete project of liberation, 1. 2, we are affirming the principles of the Constitution that says that we are a unitary state. We cannot be a unitary state with boundaries. 3, we are affirming rights that people have. in this country. In fact, government in 2013 or 2014, government commissioned a study. 2012, huh? Between 2012 and 2014, government by themselves went to pay millions to consultants to study the implication of the removal of the red line. And they have a study that even went to cabinet. What are the findings of their own study, government-owned study? If we remove the red line, the agriculture's contribution to the country's GDP will jump from 6% to about 24%, to more than 20%. That's government-owned statistics. That, in other words, if we remove this red line, it's good for the economy. This is not my argument, it's government-owned argument. In fact, the consultant concluded, and it was tabled at cabinet, maybe they realized, white people are going to be very angry. Let's just leave it here. But they've already paid millions. Their own study says that the benefits of removing the red line outweighs the negatives. That's government's own version. So we need to be able to bring about real politics of emancipation. The red line is effectively what the Berlin Wall was. That separates East Germany from West Germany. When you think about it soberly, just sit alone in your bed and you think about, so we actually have about 1,000 kilometers of a fence in our country that regulates the movement of people. You know that you can move from here, from Windhoek to Oranjemund, and you will not be asked. That's about, 600 kilometers. You will not be asked by any police. You will not get out of any vehicle. No one will check anything. You can even load cattle. There will be no checkpoint or anything. But in other parts of the country, you have something like that. That's exactly what the Berlin Wall was about, to separate East from West Germany. That is exactly what the Great Wall of China was, to prevent cultural influences. Those Ming or whoever dynasty and those people who built that wall, the Chinese were very clear that let's build a strong wall. It's going to protect us from outsiders. And our people will not be able to be influenced. So we have no contact with outsiders. So already from 1896, they said, let's create this police zone. They first had a blue line that later became a red line to be able to do those specific demarcation. There is no difference. We might as well call it the Great Red Line for the few years that it remains. It's mesmerizing when you think about it. I was reading this Mitko Act. Now, this Mitko Act, in terms of the purpose of the objects of, I first looked at the definitions there. I was hoping to see something written red line in the Mitko Act to maybe understand that in terms of the operating procedures, maybe they get it from somewhere. I look at all the definition, it only has the board, the chairperson, CEO, corporation, members, producers of livestock. Yeah? I looked at it, maybe I'm thinking, okay, maybe there's another law. But when you look at the end of that Mitko Act, I think it should be number 1 of 2006, isn't it? Yeah, number 1 of 2001. That Mitko Act actually repealed wholly the SWAMIT, it was called Southwest Africa Meat Corporation Ordinance. It actually repealed that. So you look at that, I tried to see the red line in terms of its definition there, it doesn't exist. And you look at the object, it says that to serve, promote, and coordinate the interests of producers of livestock in Namibia, not southern part of the red line, and to strive for the stabilization of the meat industry of Namibia in the national interest. Is it in the national interest for Mitco to be engaging differently, to say you are from this side and you are from this side? It doesn't mention anything about the red line. It says Namibia. Namibia is that territory that constitutes 800,000 square kilometers. It's not a territory that is cut in half. But there is something that we want to explore and say the Competition Commission should actually invest. You know that Mitco will say the same, say for example, I buy 2 cows from you, 2. I buy them in Rehoboth. Eh? Maybe they were born the same, there's hardly twins, isn't it? But they are probably born the same day. 2 Brahmans, same day. I transport them, but just before, when I go to Oshivelo, I leave one this side. Maybe I give it to my friend to go back to Windhoek. And I go with the second one to my village. Same cow. Probably when it weighs the same species, probably the same kg. But because of geography, Mitco would say that per kg, this is the amount, and per kg, this is the amount. In a free and independent Namibia. But remember what I said, we got these 2 Brahmans from Rehoboth yesterday. And one, I took it to the northern part of the red line, and the other one, I kept it here. Same, but I took them from Rehoboth yesterday. Those ones, it will be sold differently, different prices. And they actually even have the sheet that says northern part of the what. But in the Act, there is no provisions like that. They is supposed to promote the interest, in national interest in Namibia, not southern part of the red line. So what Mitco is doing is nonsense. And I know there's a young man who's trying to do things differently there, but we shouldn't be blinded by that, because you can only try. The system is a system. We're talking about a system. But the Competition Commission must be engaged. We must be able to write to them and say, because in the Act there is provision of what is called abuse of dominance. What does it mean? It means when you apply dissimilar conditions to equivalent transactions. That's what, it's actually a violation. If you apply dissimilar condition to equivalent transaction, it's tantamount to abuse of dominance. So already, we must already by tomorrow or Monday, check with Kabila and everybody else so that we can put a complaint to the Competition Commission. Mitco must be forced to pay exactly the same to all the farmers wherever they are. Because the Act doesn't speak of the red line. So I thought that what is important is for us, when we speak now, as I go and take a seat, to allow the revolutionary lawyer to lead the conversation, and then we will engage later, it is very important for you to understand the history. And when those people just tell you the economy will collapse, you ask them, but what do you mean, how will the economy collapse? Because if you say the building is collapsing, it means the bricks must, isn't it? If there are no bricks, if there's nothing, there's just maybe something hanging in the air, how do you even call that a building? How do you say it's going to collapse? Yeah? Even girls nowadays, they ask questions. When you say, I love you, they ask you, what do you mean? Huh? No, isn't it? You just accept to be told, I love you. You interrogate, isn't it? But what do you mean you love me? Now you are just being told the economy will collapse. What, the whites will be angry, the Europeans will not allow it. But you don't interrogate and say, but what do you mean? How is this thing going? And how much is it proportionally? If agriculture as a whole contributes 6% to the country's GDP, how much is other sectors contributing? Windhoek alone contributes 33% to the country's GDP. What is in here? Mostly services. 33% of the country's GDP. So between a fall of the red line that, assuming it's going to impact, is less than 1% of the country's GDP, but according to the government, and the government has made it easy for us, they say, if we remove the red line, the country's agriculture's contribution to the country's GDP will increase from 6 to more than 20%. So we already know factually that the removal of the red line will not lead to some collapse of the economy, according to government itself. It is obviously cowardice, the fear of white people, but also just generally a lack of knowledge. And even I saw some farmers there in the north region, they said, but do you think Mati wange, itashi lomongo, I know what, in the so the men have already surrendered. Because we are in a society where people are just told and they immediately start surrendering. And there's no engagement, and those of you that have gone to school, you don't interrogate these people. Do you know what it basically means? I went to single quarters yesterday, and they were telling me they bought a bull from white people for 20,200. Do you know what it means at the beginning of the day when in the newspaper people are saying students owe UNAM about 240 million? It basically means that your father could have loaded a kettle and drop it there at single quarter, get his 8,000 cash. You bring a kettle there and you ask for 8,000 or even 10,000, it won't last for more than 10 minutes. All the way from Kaoko, you get your cash and you immediately go to UNAM. So you have, some of you are having daughters, you are giving birth here in Windhoek, ST here. But he doesn't need a lot of goats there. So he must go to Brakwater and buy those goats. But he can just take his amarok. So ST, you saw that cake that he had of his amarok.
When I received that report, obviously, like you, I was certain that government will never oppose this. With the same voice in 2018, he says, but I think it will be academic because our government is probably not going to oppose this. To our surprise, they did. Not only did they oppose the case, they also joined forces with what is called the Meat Board of Namibia, whose primary role or purpose is to safeguard the meat market or meat industry in our country. When we read the papers of the Meat Board, the primary concern was the retainment of what is called or termed the lucrative European market. So when we got the opposition from government, we realized there are two things. First and foremost, it's a category of persons who oppose the removal of the red line completely, and they have a variety of reasons why they do so. Some commercial, and some simply on the basis that those from the north are unable to carry out farming activities according to standards. And then there are those who fall in the second category. And these are what I call the delay tactic gang. They employ the argument that, yes, we agree that the red line must be removed. But then they follow up and say, but not now. Must be removed gradually. They refuse to define gradually, and they refuse to put up timelines as to when exactly we can expect the removal of the red line. You should not believe this latter gang, because in 1994, it was written by a man called Johan Rollison, who authored a book titled The Meat Industry of Namibia between 1835 and 1994. This is what he said in 1994 about the red line. He states, for various reasons, including the effective control of foot and mouth disease, and in view of the stringent market requirements, the northern areas of Namibia are separated from the rest of the country by a cordon fence. No movement of animals is allowed from north of the fence to south of the fence. To alleviate this situation, adequate marketing facilities are being created in the north, and the cordon fence is also gradually being moved northwards. That's in 1994. So the narrative of the gradual removal of the red line is almost 28 years. But even 28 years later, no one, not even a single government employed person is willing to provide a timeline as to when we can expect the gradual removal of the red line. Hence, our case that is now in the High Court. We demand for the removal of the red line, far from the gradual argument. We also immediately demand a stoppage to the inhuman treatment dispensed upon persons who travel from north of the red line. We go further, and we also demand that persons who live north of the red line should be allowed to move freely without being profiled as persons who should be routinely subjected to searches or persons who should be disinfected. The primary reason here is based on this. Those who reside north of the red line are required to disembark at various checkpoints, to disinfect, to disclose or declare whatever animal product they may have. They are also subjected to the most inhuman of searches. Or Marurani is cutting through that bag of yours. But also, they are criminalized. Because if you are coming from the north towards the south, you already have a person who suspects that you have something to hide. But if you are coming from the south to the north, that criminalization is not present. So we make the point that there is a gross violation of constitutional provisions here. The first provision that is being violated is Article 8 of the Namibian Constitution, which guarantees the dignity of all persons. It is clear that the dignity of all persons shall be inviolable. Now, ask yourself this question: what does it mean that it means that you are to be treated as a human being, like all other human beings. Doesn't matter if you are coming from north of the red line or if you are coming from the south of the red line. To request us to disembark at these various checkpoints not only violates their dignity, it also violates their right to be equal before the law. You'd find commonly at these checkpoints long lines of motor vehicles, all waiting to be violated. So everyone is sitting in those motor vehicles patiently for their chance to be violated. From where I come from, this line goes and exceeds past what we call Casablanca, and it proceeds north. You'd find persons playing games along the road, some having a party, just waiting for the line to subside. But they are not waiting for something which is productive, they are waiting to be violated. Because immediately once they arrive at the checkpoint, it doesn't matter how old they are or how young they are required to disembark from a motor vehicle. They are then required to step on a disinfection mat because, for sure, they must be infected by some kind of disease. It doesn't matter how many pairs of shoes you have. The fact is, you should not be stepping on that mat simply because you are coming from north of the red line. Also, if one looks at the constant request to disclose. Do you have any animal products there? So you need to disclose. Assume you are sitting in a bus full of people, you now have to disclose, now I have dried meat, or now I have some chicken. It simply strikes you at the core of being a human being. You are ashamed of yourself. You are humiliated to the core. To the extent where you are requested to disembark from the motor vehicle and as stated, you have two choices: to consume your product or to see it being destroyed. Both of those, there is no lesser evil. Both attack you and both violate you and reduce your humanity. Now, we call upon our brothers and sisters who are not from north of the red line to sympathize with us, but also to support us. Sean Gary says, my friend, is also an activist. He's saying, Katila, come back later, the old place. But I'm telling him, nigga, this nearest place. Alright? Dit heeft om te doen met die waarheid van een persoon. Dit heeft om te doen met die gelijkheid van een persoon voor die wet. Dit heeft om te doen met die persoonlijkheid van een persoon. Zo, dit is niet die oor vlees niet. Ik wil zoals een man voelen als ik van Wambuland afkom en met mijn vrouw. Ik wil niet met elkaar komen. Ik wil niet op een mat gaan trappen. Ik wil ook met elkaar moet ook hier rondgekrapt worden. Ik wil vlees samenbrengen om met mijn kennis te komen eten. Dat is doelings wat veel meer als vlees is. So, what we are saying is, this case is not just about meat, as people want to characterize it. It goes deeper than that. It goes to the core of humanity, it goes to the core of the right to dignity, it goes to the core of the right to equality. What is concerning is this. We have not been able to find a law that makes provision for the red line. There's no such law. Which means it's unlawful. If something is not made provision for by any law, clearly, it's unlawful. It then follows that if it's unlawful, it shouldn't be there. If you read the Constitution carefully, you will find that it recognizes that there were a variety of categorization of natives in the country. As a matter of fact, there was various native proclamations that categorized you into different homelands: Wamboland, Caprivi, Okavango, Herero, and so forth. It also recognized what was commonly known as the Rehoboth Habit. So Rehoboth was afforded some kind of semi-independence from the rest of the nation, and they were categorized in that zone. What is also important to know is that before independence, we had zones called police zones, which are related, but are different from what we are now calling the red line. Because you'd find these zones in Ovambulen, obviously the whole of the northern district, and then you'd find them somewhere in Omaruru, you'd find them in Okakarara, you'd find wherever you'd find what they called natives at the time. They had these particular proclamations to deal with the regulation and governance of those areas. But they also prescribed what was called permits to exit those homelands or native zones or police zones, and so that you can go into the what they called the commercial areas. all those have been shut down. You are no longer required to produce any permit as a human being to come to window. There is no longer such a thing as robot habit. So, obviously there are some elements that remain, which relates to the limitations in marriage, succession, which also relate to whether or not the governance of property and so on. There are those remnants that still remain, and that is what the president said, or was quoted to have said the day before yesterday, or yesterday, that that act is being declared as an obsolete act. But that's not what we are talking about here. Even when they that act is obsolete, the act relating to native proclamations and so forth, the red line will still remain. Because the red line is not made provision for in those acts. It preceded those proclamations. They found it there. So it is now being perpetuated, obviously, with these implications that it violates Article 8 of the Namibian Constitution and Article 10 of the Namibian Constitution. So we call upon persons who think that they are now benefiting from what is clearly a discrimination. Those persons who want to lock other human beings outside the free trade system. Persons who want to rely on the patronage of others at the expense of others. We call upon them to reflect carefully. Someone is raising their hands. Do you have something to say? All right. So the case was instituted in May last year, and we only found ourselves in court around August 2021. And without boring you much about what happens there, we appeared for case plea conference. At one point, we also appeared for purposes of debating whether or not the meat board should join the case, and they were allowed to join. So the last time we went to court was on the 27th of January this year, and the court ordered us to meet with government lawyers as well as those representing the meat board. The meat board is being represented by a law firm, Tienes and Law, who have instructed Advocate Heathcote, whilst the government is being represented by Mrs. Da Silva, who has instructed Advocate Bunzaya. We are representing Job, and obviously we've also instructed an advocate. We've instructed Advocate Chibwana, who is also assisting us with the matter. So we are currently at an engagement space as ordered by the High Court, because this is peremptory, but it's not unusual. All cases before combating usually go through an engagement process just to see if there's no settlement agreement that can be reached between the parties. That is where we are now. Obviously, they have filed some documents which attack the propriety of our documents. They filed as is their right. We have responded thereto, but for what is important to know now is that we are now at an engagement level. We met with the lawyers of the government attorney yesterday, and we'll probably be meeting the lawyers of the meat board next week. But the message is clear, and I don't think anyone can actually go on a public platform, I'm still waiting, and defend the red line. Especially after having been informed of the underpinning racial and discriminatory implications of the red line. So to cut this a short story short, that was why I was called here to give an input on how far the case is. Perhaps I should also tell you the nature of the case is an action proceedings. In other words, we want to call witnesses to court to come and testify because we think it's very important. It's not one of those cases where you can actually articulate the position clearly without the humanity element. So we want to call a human being to court so that they can demonstrate to the Honorable Court. Understand we are going to get a full bench a full bench court. So to demonstrate to the court, a full bench court simply means, usually cases are simply heard by one judge. But because of the importance and the national interest that the case attracts, in this case we're informed that it's possible we may get 3 judges or 2 judges. It's a wave of cases of national importance that are now coming to the High Court. And you would see that they all get full bench because of the importance ascribed to the outcomes of those cases. Thank you. So, I've just been informed that I left something out. So maybe let me put it this. As you know, there's only one man in Namibia who has took it upon himself to launch a case against the REDLINE. But there are millions of men who are affected. So we call on those who are able to contribute, to kindly contribute financially or by prayers, those who are church going, the support, but also by simply carrying across the message to whoever you find, all and sundry, who may be confused on what we are talking about, who may think that we are people who simply don't want government to rest. Educate them. Demonstrate to them how it affects themselves. Because by doing that, that's the only way government will be able to realize that persons on the ground are also fed up. Thank you.
Thank you, the revolutionary lawyer. The book that has been spoken about is this one. So, one of the things that actually happened is that by engaging into this discussion, we also started researching. And as you research, you get surprised because you start wondering, but why? What is the basis then? What is the basis then of keeping, even just defending? You would see now that government went to call for an advocate. So you see the government is going all out to defend the REDLINE. Your money is now going to pay the first lawyer and it's going to pay the advocate. At the same time, the meat board, which is, meat board is supposed to be a parastatal. So you could clearly see that they must be receiving some sort of budgetary allocation. So they are also having a lawyer, they are having an advocate, and they are just being busy with these funny things. This interlocutory, just to prevent us from actually going to do arguments. And part of what we also want to do, and as part of the strategy that the lawyer was explaining, is that we want to get traditional leaders, because some of them have already begun to call me, so that they can come and tell the court, those 3 judges, about their condition in the situation. We want to have a mother with 5 kids at UNAM and at NAST. And those kids, for her to ventilate and articulate to the court that I have 100 goats at home, but I'm forced to buy this amount of meat from ShopRite because of the REDLINE. We want to be able to have a young man who got married and have 100 cattle in Kaoko, but he was forced to buy 5 of them as lobola for his bride in Ketmanswo. So it's not just about our case, but of course we are very clear that we cannot just, if there is no one who's responsible, and then if everyone is responsible, then no one is responsible. So Noah and Nata, we are back to you. I don't know what's going to happen is to facilitate the next program so that we can engage now more. We have spoken enough. Hopefully we have given you the context. And those of you that are going to be sending questions online, but I'll give it back to you, I would assume.
Thank you, CIC. Thank you, Kabila. I was just captured now. No, I had to just capture me. I was not prepared for this, but yeah. The next round is actually the Q&A. Sorry, sir? Or Q&A session, where we going to then collect questions from you guys and get them answered by our CIC and the revolutionary lawyer here. What we'll be doing is that we'll take a round of 3 questions, get them perhaps answered, and then we'll give another round again. Is that fair, CIC? Okay, we go. First come, first serve. 1, 2, 3.
Okay, good afternoon, evening, everybody. I'm Simon, so I don't really have a question. I just have food for thought. So, first of all, MICO has an actual process to apparently deactivate the Fmd virus. It's a whole process on its own. So what happens is the cow will come there, they will look at it on feet. Is it not limping? Is it not salivating? What? And then it moves forward to a screening process again. Look at the head, look at the feet. And there is an actual process that is now called Fmd Maturation. So this is aimed at deactivating the Fmd virus. So this means if the virus was present, it should have been deactivated and it won't be able to infect anymore, if that makes sense. So now the argument is, if you have such a process, why would you again have a cordon that prevents or that discriminates cattle if there is a process to actually kill the virus, if I should put it like that? So I don't understand it there. And the other point is, I don't understand the basis of discrimination. How did they decide we are going to put this fence here? Why? What did the people in the north of the cordon fence do to deserve such treatment? Because it doesn't make sense. I mean, why didn't they put it at the borders of Angola? Why didn't they put it in the center of the country? So some of these points I really doesn't make sense. If you can deactivate the virus, then the cattle should come and you deactivate it. And if you find that there is a virus, then you send it back. Because the actual process is that they don't even test if the cow has FMD. They don't do that. They just decide cattle in the north of the cordon fence maybe have FMD, and then these ones are free, which doesn't make scientific sense, actually. Thank you so much.
Yeah, good evening, activists. My name is Vetare Landrodu, a retired politician. Very first in Africa to retire at 45 years. I'm actually very sympathetic to the cause because of the past history. Some of my families are on the other side of the red line, but then I'm conflicted by Eurocentric indoctrinations that have been brainwashed me economically. So on my way to my presentation, the road will be very bumpy. First, to the lawyer, I wanted to ask why you didn't make a skeleton application where first you request the government to allow meat to be brought beyond southern of the red line. Only meat, not cows on hoof. Now I know they will advance the argument of saying the cows on the other side will eat the bones and then they will be infected with FMD. But I think that one could have been very easy, and then you move to the bigger one. So by having a skeleton application, it actually opened up to their weakness to defend the bigger case of the red line. Now, the issue that we need to understand is the geopolitics, the international politics that, as the first presenter, the doctor said, this is colonial mind that have put the cordon fence, white Germans. And Namibia as a country, we signed quite a number of protocols with EU, where Germany is the bigger part in EU. They play a very huge role. And even that's why there is a Brexit today, because the Englishman was pushed to the periphery by the Germans, and they have to run away. As a result, if we start with opening up or shifting the line, then we must know that the EU will come in, Germans will come in to protect their grandchildren here in Namibia. So what will they do? They will cancel the agreement to get meat from Namibia to EU. The South African meat is controlled by the white, the meat industry. So the same will also happen. So we must be ready for embargo for Namibia. That's the fact. Because politics, international politics of economics will come into play. As we speak today, looking from the past, economically, the price of a cow today stands at a calf of 6 months, southern of the red line, stand at $51.48.46, down up to 26 per kgs. Why? Because around about 96 farms in South Africa is under quarantine for almost now 8 to 9 months, or I think more than 12 months. And when we are going to open the quarantine in South Africa, then the price in Namibia will drop. Because first, those farms must supply the market in South Africa. And then remember, Namibia as a country, while we have almost 4 million cattle on the other side of the northern fence, we claim that we cannot consume our own meat. We need to sell it to South Africa. But then, if you go to Pick and Pay ShopRite, Woman and Broke, You will get the meat from Brazil, you get the meat from New Zealand, you get the meat from South Africa. So the situation will worsen. So we must have a remedy. We must have a remedy of the outcome of the court if it is come into the favor of the farmers. Because I also feel pity. I think it was before 2000 when the then Minister of Agriculture opened. It was very interesting. You are coming from the village, you enter the hospital in Oshakati, you were not allowed to eat the meat from the catering company that is providing food in Oshakati Hospital. The meat was supposed to come from the northern side. I think it was also the same with the schools, but then it was open. So therefore, the situation in Namibia is very double standard. And the problem is for us, the voters. All the lawmakers that are coming from the northern cordon fence, what do? They get the votes, then they buy their farms on the other side. All of them, or 90%, only few of them. They commercialized the southern cordon fence for their living being, and then they traditionalize the northern cordon fence. They only go there for weddings, funerals, that's all. So there's no living for them. As a result, you have a team that you think they are representing you, but then it's the same team that is fighting against you at the same time. So, besides the legal aspect, we need to have a political paradigm shift by bringing in people into position that will easily amend and change the law into our favor. I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. There's one there, Noah. Noah? The uncle here.
Good evening. My name is Erwin Vetarela. I'm a regional councillor of Chinene constituency of Maeke region. So I came in support of the removal of the red line and the humiliation thereof. I hope that one day we will do away with this independence signed to favor only white by our elders, and that we will be able to compete at the same scale as well. Remember, we have a problem inland as well. The whites auction our cattle for a price they want, but when I go to buy a cattle from them, they set the price. So today, they buy my cattle for 8,000, sell it tomorrow to my neighbor for 16,000. The very same cattle coming from the same village. So that's a problem to us as well. That's why I came in support of this, and it was long overdue, and thanks for having that balls to say I'll stand up for it. I'll support. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Hello. All right. Activist Namolo. The argument being raised for the anti-removal of the red line is not only about meat. You know that. I can't bring ombidi from the north. Spinach, now it's the rain season. I can't bring it here. So to argue to say to collapse the economy is just a portion, just a fraction of the whole part. I can't bring mangoes from the Zambezi region to here, just even to sell. I mean, and there's plenty of mangoes in Zambezi now during this time of the year. So the meat aspect is very small.
I breed, I'm a farmer, you know, small, I started farming. I have over 60 pigs. You know, I'm struggling to sell it with a good price because as Vambos, you know, if you say it's 1,500, say, you know. But here, the pork, you know, fetches quite a good price, you know, for me. I have chicken. Of course, they allow chicken to come here. We've seen that relaxation for now. But it's only when it's dead. I can't bring it live here. It's not the discrimination is not only about meat as beef. It's everything. And the argument to say no, the people in the north, they are not selling their cattle to the abattoirs. Do you know why? Because if I take my 5 cattle and I take it to the memes who are selling along the road, I get a better price than when I sell my cattle to Mitco. Because Mitco's price is discriminated. They give me maybe 7,000. They say, this ox is old, you know, they make those funny things. But a meme, they won't even struggle. I sell mine 9,000, 10,000 even. So it's not that we don't sell or there's no business. I went with a friend of mine, who was Oshiro speaking. He said, yeah, it's big business. Everywhere you go in the north. I'm talking about now the north where I come from. There's always meat under the tree. Every day fresh meat. So don't tell us that we are not selling our cattle. We are selling our cattle in this way. So to say that I can't bring my meat here is total discrimination. In fact, my things were also, you know, confiscated there because one person didn't understand apparently the law. You know, chicken. I brought chicken here and then it was confiscated there because the person who didn't understand that there's a relaxation towards that. Such discrimination, humiliation. It was worth 60,000 that I lost through that thing. So, over my dead bodies, as long as I'm alive, I'm willing to testify in as far as the court case is concerned.
Thank you, activist. Sorry guys, we going to give the chance maybe to, okay, 2 more. Noah, this side also. Noah, this side.
Okay, evening guys. The guy that ate a cake in the birthday instead of a goat. Vinny, you have plenty of them in the north. But guys, let's agree to disagree. We are all suffering the same consequences. My boss, I don't want to go personal, but I just want you to listen to me. I believe you are a father. I believe you have maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 kids. But all of us, we all depend on NASFAF. NASFAF just to fund our kids. As Mr. Job said, a lot of people owe you now. If I ask everybody here to raise up his hand, if you owe you now, most even, maybe all of you. But we can settle that bill, simple, with 3 cattle from the north. Your uncle can give you. You sell here. Let me tell you one thing. When you came into Window 2004, when you finished high school, the Omatara used to be full of meat. Ne? Full of meat. Like a lot of cattle. Maybe they slaughter 10 cattle every day. But go to Greenwell Matala today. Go to Van Henda. Go to Singapore. There's no supply of cattle. Even here, there used to be Jacob that used to sell here. They can't get stock anymore. Because people tested the meat, the dollar that's put up by Mitco. They rather take their cattle there. But now, for us that are doing street market, we are restricted to go get our cattle from the other side where it's a little bit cheaper. Then we make business here. But now, we don't understand. Okay, let's take it from the base where it came from. When our uncle came from exiles, they couldn't read. They signed for things they don't understand. Do you guys understand this? Okay, I want to ask maybe Mr. Gavira, is there any law amendment about red line when our elders came back. Is there anything that was done about it? What happened, what I understood is if you are in advantage, like maybe you're in a minister or something, you get you do what? You get a advantage of buying a farm. Now, instead of go there and do something about your people, we only stand for their advantage that they are benefiting, forgetting that there are families that are suffering the other side. So let's agree on things that are making sense. And one thing you need to know, Europe, they are all in demand of meat. They don't have cattle. China want to get meat from Namibia. Like they want to start importing from here to China. But because of white people, China was restricted. The late Akapandi tried his best to export meat to China from Mondangwa. He opened a very big abattoir there. What happened is, the boy here, they got involved, they do one thing, and then finally, end of the day, the abattoir was closed. But he employed up to maybe 100 people. So the business died because white are actually discriminating us here. So let's look things on both sides. Meat is something in demand. Want or not, European has to come get cattle here. I thank you.
Thank you, SD. May I finish this side now, quickly? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good evening. I was to ask some critical questions, but I was very much provoked by something that was said by our lawyer here. And it has disturbed me and shut down the whole power. It is about the lawyers that represent the MITCO. Please, can you just repeat maybe, Mr. Kadila, who are those law firms? And before I ask, I said why. Who's that?
Do you want to know the law?
The law firm, yeah.
Or TNSN law?
TNSN law. Instructing? You see? You see? When you listen there.
Sorry. Maybe just to correct, it's not MITCO fighting, joining the case. That is the mid board.
Yeah, but also just to
So it's just to correct
caution and signal, not to barrage the personality of lawyers, otherwise.
Very good. Yeah, so it's okay. So thank you very much. Thank you very much. The law firm, I follow the names of the law firm and I balance the case at hand. So it's good that you are here. So anyway, the next question is, I look at all the faces here. I only see young faces. Are you the only people affected by the red lines here in Namibia? The young generations? Huh? Oh, you are representing the parents. I'm asking this question deliberately. Ne? It's good that you can say, you represent the parents, if you say that truly. So, if you represent the parents, that's very good. So, I came here with an interest of knowing, because I follow, and I've been following, and I want to still follow what is happening, or what had happened, and what is going to happen. Because I was born that time, during the colonial era, before independence. Now we are here. I have two experiences, before independence and after independence. Now, coming to the red line, I mean, Job, you are now a father, you are a household. So what I'm trying to say is, your interest, the interest that you brought about here, that's why I'm asking the young generation. Probably this case might take some years, I'm not assuming, but you will be the witness of tomorrow. So what I'm trying to say is, if there is something that is affecting communities, citizens, it's something that one have to take it up serious. My name is Pendapala Nakathingo. Most of you know me. Yeah, so I just came here for interest's sake because since independence, I mean, before independence, we've been hearing red line, red line, red line. And people were not passing there without a cop card. Huh? Cop card, no? As a belief. So now, again, we hear about red line. Many of the young generations here are starving. They want to have, you know, to at least have life. Not just about meat, about survival in many ways. So what I'm trying to say is keep it up, keep on moving. We are observing, we are following, and yeah. So, and probably the most important thing is the support of your elders, the support of the traditional authorities, as you have said. It is very, very important because you don't want to be seen, or this case to be seen as the case of radical youth. This case must be seen as a case that is affecting many Namibians. So for now, thank you very much. I just come here to be with you.
It's okay, SD. I think, can we strike a deal, guys? I see there's a lot of hands. Maybe we limit our questions to only 2 minutes maximum, because I think we are taking too long.
All right.
That will be after the next round, because he said we must end.
May I be the last one, please?
I think let me just answer the first wave, and then we can start with you, if there's no objection. Look, here's the thing. The arguments against the removal of the red line are flawed for a number of reasons. But chief amongst those reasons is because they are personalized. The counter-argument is always personalized, that, oh, that's just Job who is trying to do A, B, and C. That's just Job campaigning. So I wasn't censoring the gentleman. I was simply cautioning that we shouldn't adopt the same mistake. To personalize our arguments and say, but this is the lawyer representing who and who, or this is the judge. It doesn't matter who it is. Doesn't even matter the color of their skin, in my view. What matters is the central argument that we are pushing. And in my view, we have a strong argument. Our argument is supported by facts. And this is to answer my senior, who retired early. Our arguments are supported by scientific facts. There was an investigation that was commissioned by central government. They have already made findings in support of the removal of the red line. So issues relating to the collapse of the market were considered by that team, and they found that the removal of the red line is more likely to benefit the nation as opposed to the retention of the red line. You know, Shirero we have a saying, pu peno mbango, peno njira. So, we have located the Mbango part. We're now carving the way. Because as I stated, we've observed the gradual argument that we'll remove it gradually. But we are saying no, to answer your question as to why we did not file a skeletal application, but we are saying, look, we could have done that. That option was always there, to file a skeletal application as per your observation. But we thought that because of the central humanity element at the core of the case, it's important that we project it as an action so that we can have the benefit of a witness in court, so that we can demonstrate to all and sundry the dignity as well as the equality that is being violated by the retention of the red line. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, I will just try to summarize. You see, there's always, you see, I have a 4-year-old son that is turning 5. He goes to Montessori children now because I'm in Windhoek, so he must go to school. It's a good school, but what are the consequences? The consequences are that there is no Oshiwambole at the school. So there are consequences. For every action, there is going to be reaction. So you then do a cost-benefit analysis. Do I stay with my child and teach him in Oshindonga at home? And then he would not know how to engage with other kids from different backgrounds and not know how to open a computer. Then you do that balancing effect. It's the same thing. Take an example of our football. It's in a mess.